Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. You're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I hope that by the end of this video, I'll have earned your subscription. And to everyone else who's watching, if you enjoy this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. That's how YouTube knows to promote my videos. And if you would like to help support the channel financially, because making videos can get time-consuming and expensive, consider visiting my eGuitar Plans website. There's a link in the description below, and there you can purchase plans for building guitars and the tools that we use to make guitars. And you can also visit my Highline Guitars YouTube merch store, which is displayed below this description. And there you can get all those same plans, but you can also get some t-shirts as well. And just know that whatever purchase you make is going to help support this channel, and you're getting something in return. So what I'm going to be talking about today is part 15 of the V-shaped guitar build. And that means I'm going to start the final assembly. Now, I'm not going to be able to cover the whole final assembly in this video because it would take too long. So I'll do part of it in episode 15, and then I'll do part of it in episode 16. And when we get to episode 16, you're going to see that there have been some changes made. So let's get that guitar out here and start doing the final assembly. The first part that I'm going to install is the Floyd Rose bridge. And to do that, I'm going to tap in the posts with a fret hammer. Next, I'm going to position and mark the location for the screws that are going to hold the spring claw into position in the tremolo spring cavity. And I'll mark that with a simple center punch, and then I'll use my Dremel with an 1/8 inch drill bit to drill the holes for those screws. Next, I'm going to solder a ground wire to that spring claw, and that's what's going to ground the strings of the bridge. Now, to install this spring claw, what I like to do is put some paste furniture wax on the screw. That makes it really easy to screw them into the wood. And I'll install those just about halfway in, and later on, when I install the bridge with the springs and string the guitar up and start tuning and intonating, I can adjust those springs to get the correct spring tension on the bridge. Now, in truth, the installation of the bridge at this point is somewhat temporary. I just want to get the bridge into place to make sure that everything is lined up correctly, which is kind of funny because if things didn't line up correctly, I don't know what I would do. But fortunately, since I designed this on my computer and used a CNC machine to cut out the body and the cavities, everything lines up perfectly. Now, in a previous episode, I drilled the holes for installing the Floyd Rose nut, and the process of installing that nut raised up some of the wood around the holes. So I need to slice off that wood so that when I install the nut, it will lie flat against the bottom of the shelf. The installation of the nut at this point is permanent. I'm not going to be removing it for any reason anytime later. So I'm going to go ahead and install the lockdown components, but I'm only going to install them loosely so that I can run strings through the slots in the nut later on. The installation of the tuners is next, and normally this would be a permanent installation. However, as you're going to see in the next episode, part 16, I'm going to have to remove these tuners because I'm going to put my logo on this headstock, and that was an afterthought, so more about that later. But I'm going to go ahead and install them now so that I can at least string up the guitar, tune it up, intonate it, and then set the action and check the frets for any high spots that would cause string buzz. So I'm just going to sort of loosely install them in place first using the included nut and washers. And then once that's done, I'm going to flip the guitar over, and I have to adjust the rotation of the tuners and make sure that they are perfectly straight and aligned correctly, which is mostly visual, but it's important to do that so that it doesn't look like there's one or two tuners that are knocked out of kilter. And then once I'll do that, I can then drill the pilot holes for the little tiny screws that keep the tuners from rotating. And unfortunately, I forgot to video the process of drilling those pilot holes, but it's just a simple matter of taking a very small 1/16 inch diameter drill bit and drilling just to the depth of the length of those screws. Then I will coat the threads with furniture wax and install those into position into the tuners on the back of the headstock. Some of you may be wondering why I put paste furniture wax on the screw threads, and the reason for that is because these screws are really tiny, and installing them into a hardwood like maple can create a lot of heat and friction, which will cause the head of the screws to snap off. So applying that paste furniture wax makes it much easier to install those screws. And if you don't have paste furniture wax, you can also rub the threads against a candle or a bar of soap. It'll do basically the same thing, but I like to use the paste furniture wax because it will dry hard, whereas candle wax and soap doesn't. And once I have all those tiny little screws tightened down, I can then flip the guitar over and proceed with tightening the nuts on the other side of the tuners on the front side of the headstock. And to do that, I use a spanner wrench and just tighten them enough to where they feel good and secure and they're not going to go anywhere. Next, I have to drill a hole from the cavity where the battery box is going to be installed, and that hole has to go down into the control cavity. And the purpose of that is so that I can route the wiring from the battery box down into the control cavity. Then I can permanently install the battery box with the 4 provided screws, and once again I'm going to pack the threads with some paste furniture wax so that they are easy to install. The jack for this guitar is going to be installed into a Fender style jack plate. So I assembled that, and this particular jack is a stereo jack rather than the usual mono jack, and that's because you have to use a stereo jack when using active pickups. But as you can see, it doesn't quite fit into the cavity that I had routed on my CNC machine. No problem, I just grabbed my Dremel and carved out a deeper cavity into the back of the oval-shaped cavity to provide clearance for the back of the jack. Then I routed the wires into the control cavity and connected those to the prongs on the back of the jack. A mono jack has 2 connections, one for the signal and one for ground, but a stereo jack has 2 connections for the signal and then a 3rd connection for the ground, and that ground wire has to be soldered. So that's what I'm going to do here is I will install a length of wire, cut it to the correct length, and I always try to go with the shortest length I can without reducing the size of the length of the wire so much that I can't do future repairs if necessary. So then I'll just tin the end of that ground wire with some solder, and then I will solder that to the lug, which is also tinned prior to actually soldering the wire into position. Now I can install the jack into position and I have plenty of clearance. Well, I shouldn't say plenty of clearance. It's still fairly tight, but once I get everything arranged, it fits in nicely and the jack works correctly. So then I can just install it with the 2 provided screws, and again, the threads are waxed with furniture wax to make it easy to install them. Now next on the agenda is to install the pickups, and to do that I have to first install the pickup rings. Now these are angled pickup rings, so they have to be installed so that they angle down towards the neck, and I'll install those with the provided screws and springs, and I'll just basically get them roughed into position. I don't know exactly how deep they need to go into the body yet, but before I can install them I have to make sure that I connect the wiring for each pickup. And one of the things I like about these EMG pickups is there's no soldering involved with the wiring, except for on that ground lug on the jack. Everything is plug and play, so it makes it really easy to install pickups and potentiometers and all that. So it just is a nice way to do it. Now here's a tip. Installing pickups can be kind of a challenge when you have to flip the guitar over because they'll fall out of the cavity. So one of the things I like to do is, after I install the neck pickup, which I always do first, is I put a piece of blue painter's tape to hold the pickup into position so it doesn't come flopping out of the cavity as I install the bridge pickup. Unfortunately, one thing I noticed as I began to install the pickups is that the screws that hold the pickups to the rings are too long for the cavities that I routed. So I grabbed a drill and a 3-inch diameter drill bit and just drilled shallow holes on each end of the cavity to provide clearance for those screws. And with the pickups installed, I used a center punch to mark the position of the holes that I need to drill for mounting the pickups into the body. Now, drilling pilot holes is really important, and you have to get the size exactly right for the screw that you're going to be installing. And you can find resources online that will tell you what size bit to use with the particular size screw that you're using. So knowing the size of the screw goes a long way in helping you to get the correct size hole so that when you mount a component, it's not going to strip out the threads at some point and cause the part to come loose from the wood that you've attached it to. Now, I did run into a problem, and that has to do with the pickup rings that I use. These are 2 different height pickup rings. The neck pickup ring is lower than the bridge. And later on, as I was doing the setup for the guitar and I installed the strings and got the action set and everything, I noticed that the strings were almost touching the bridge pickup ring. So what I ended up doing was I purchased another set of these rings, and I used the neck ring from that second set and replaced the bridge ring with that neck ring so that the 2 pickups have the same height ring. And that gave me the clearance I needed to get the action exactly where I need it to be. In truth, these staggered height pickup rings are designed for guitars that will have an angled neck. And unfortunately, when I was sourcing rings, I couldn't find metal rings that were flat and the same height for both the neck and the bridge that were of a quality that I wanted. And these particular rings were very high quality, but unfortunately they were the staggered height. So I found that with this particular design, it just didn't work. So I had to swap out that bridge ring for the neck ring from a second set. But that works out well. It just means I have to spend double the money to get the pickup rings that I need. Okay guys, well that's all the time I have for this episode. In the next episode I'm going to finish the assembly, and that's going to include stringing up the guitar, tuning it, intonating it, testing it, possibly doing some spot leveling if that's necessary. And there's going to be a change that was made. This was sort of an afterthought. Specifically, I'm going to be applying my Highline logo to the headstock. Normally, I don't do it on the headstock. I do it on the back on the control cavity cover. However, the future owner of the guitar requested that I place my logo on the headstock. And since the guitar is already made, I can't do inlay like I normally would. So instead, I'm going to be doing a decal. So I will show you the process that I use to apply a decal to a headstock. So be sure to check that out. In the meantime though, as always, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back for episode 16.